It's Clandestime.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Clandestime. I am Tom Secker, coming to you from the grassy knolls of North Yorkshire, and this is episode 61, Homeland season 5, episode 4.
We will do what it takes to unite the country around your government. But we must act quickly, before your enemies gain more strength.
You are wrong. The world recognizes the real danger in Syria, the so-called Islamic State. As they get stronger, Bashir no longer looks so evil. The world will come around. They will support us against Daesh.
If Assad stays in power, he'll have to answer for his crimes.
What crimes?
Barrel bombs, chemical weapons.
Bullshit. Lies.
We've seen the bodies on Ghouta. Assad's already told the world it was his commanders who fired the weapons. Think he'll hesitate to hand you over to the ICC?
By way of a quick introduction to our discussion, this episode of Homeland was not all that exciting. So in this conversation, Pearse and I made a few detours and we kind of rambled all over the place. But we mostly talked about the concept of hyperreality, the condition of a consciousness that cannot distinguish between the real and the simulated. And we show how the show Homeland does this, and has this effect on people, but also consider the question of why. Why would the CIA be interested in using this effect that shows like Homeland have on their audiences? What is the advantage for the CIA in hyperreality? Well, hello again, Pearse. Welcome back once more to Clandestime to talk about Homeland. We're on the 4th episode of our little review series here. And how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm really excited to join you again, and I'm excited about this episode.
Yeah, this was a somewhat simpler, I guess, episode. I think it's fair to say than the last couple that we've been thrown by this season. It's, as always, we should first say, everyone go and watch the episode before listening to the review, but I guess some people aren't going to, as per usual. But just to quickly kind of summarize what happened in this episode, I think there was sort of 3 main plot points or plot strands that got really touched on in this one. There's the hacking, the ongoing hacking situation, where the Laura Poitras character realized that the Turkish Aaron Swartz gave her a dud flash drive, a flash drive that didn't have all the other CIA documents on it. And so she seeks out a hacker to help her get in touch with him and tell him about this and ask him why. And meanwhile, as predicted by you, what had happened is Newman's German friend had stolen the documents, had, flipped them off that flash drive and onto another, and he tried to sell them to Russian intelligence and rather predictably ends up getting brutally murdered along with his girlfriend. Then there's the Syria storyline, which of course is still going. This episode, basically, the CIA try and recruit a senior Syrian general with the aim of using him to replace Assad after the CIA stage a coup in Syria. And all is going very, very well until the guy's plane leaves. It takes off from a Swiss airport. I think it's supposed to be in Switzerland.
Yeah, they're in Geneva.
Right. Going on the way back to Syria, and it explodes about a minute after takeoff, and that's the big, dramatic, twister, cliffhanger ending to the episode. Meanwhile, while all of this is going on, Carrie and Quinn... Yeah, not my favourite storyline in this episode, the Carrie and Quinn bit. But after wasting quite a lot of time recording videos for Carrie's estranged daughter, Franny, and basically arguing quite a lot, they eventually decide, we've got to try and figure out if this safe deposit box, this place where Quinn picks up his targets and where Carrie's name was, they have to figure out whether that's been compromised, whether that's been infiltrated by someone else. So after quite a lot of messing around, to be honest, they could really have got to this point quicker, I've got to say.
Yeah.
Quinn goes into the building, drops off this faked photo of Carrie dead on the ground that they've put together. And just as he's coming out of the building, they're ambushed. Quinn is shot, he fires back, he kills the assassin, and Carrie steals the assassin's phone. And then right at the end of the episode, just as the plane is taking off to carry the Syrian general back to Syria, Carrie, for some reason, only then bothers to check the phone and see if there's any numbers in the call memory on this phone. Top-notch CIA agent that she is. Yeah. She gets it, she finds there is a number there, Quinn says call it, she calls it, and she gets Allison, the CIA's Berlin station chief, who is stood there answering her phone watching this plane explode.
Right.
In what I thought that was just, one coincidence too far, really. So that's what's happened. And I guess first question, did you enjoy this episode?
Yeah, I did. I did enjoy the episode. It felt a little bit more like we're sort of getting some of the pieces coming together. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, once you think you have a handle on what's going on, you get a giant plane exploding. You get, Allison is behind trying to kill Carrie and Quinn. Talking about rogue CIA operations. So yeah, I did enjoy this episode. I was a little bummed out with some of Quinn and Carrie's stuff. Her recording these videos to Franny, it's like, don't even record them, just disappear. And of course, then even when she's recording them, she keeps messing up, and it's like, are you guys gonna, put this in Final Cut and edit out these moments where you're saying, I'm still alive? No, I'm not. I'm actually dead, Franny. Don't worry. So that was just stupid. But other than that, yeah, I did enjoy this episode, and I thought there were some really interesting, again, these the geopolitical stuff in this episode, like in some of the previous ones, is really fascinating. And I liked too. I mean, it seems as if perhaps the Syria storyline isn't really going to be the main focus so much of this season.
You're right. They did kind of pull the rug out from under us on that one. Just at the point that we thought, oh right, so they're going to actually stage a coup in Syria, and this general is presumably going to take over, Mossadegh style. Well, not
right. Yeah.
The other way around. But and then you think, just as you're right, just at the point that you think, right, so that's a piece that's now in place. That's something we can assume is going to play out over the next couple of episodes, that there's going to be an actual coup attempt in Syria. And then no, they blow the plane up. And just, tell me if you think I'm completely wrong here, because I have been wrong about several things so far in this review series that we've done. But right at the end, when the plane blows up and Saul, you see a shot of Saul going, oh my God. And Allison's answering her phone, and the expression on her face is almost like she expected the plane to blow up. Did you get that at all, or am I just interpreting that very differently? Or
I think the producers are deliberately at least putting that idea out there. Again, we've seen in Homeland, but in shows dealing with terrorism or things like that, it's always a cell phone call that blows up something. So the fact that she gets a phone call and then the plane blows up, and obviously Allison is, doing her, she's really, not my favorite character, but power to her for kind of, she's just going to do whatever she's going to do. Obviously she's willing to kill Carrie and Quinn.
If necessary.
She somehow seems to know about Saul's secret, operation. I wonder if is this pillow talk between the two of them?
Oh, I guess so. Yeah.
So she's willing to do that. I wouldn't be and she's, she was the one who's sort of pushing this whole, the Russians are going to take over in Ukraine. I think they're kind of positioning her as the more reactionary voice within the CIA. So it wouldn't be that crazy to think that she would be capable of doing this. And I think she's also kind of like a Carrie type character, losing her grip on control around her. She seemed to be running a very tight ship, but now she's got this security breach. Dar Adal is coming down on her. Saul is, I don't know what, sort of, sleep with me or else, that kind of a thing. So, could it be possible? And just as you were saying that, I was sort of thinking back to the opening scene where they're in, I believe his name is Itan, the Israeli ambassador. And she's, very like, oh, thank you. I was just sort of thinking when she goes up and talks to him, thank you for having us in your house. And so wonderful. And, in the preview for the next episode, they're obviously looking at the Israeli ambassador as being involved in the assassination, which, again, wouldn't be the first time, Israel has, blown up something related to Syria or Iran or something, or Lebanon, something like that. So, yeah, it was weird.
Oh, yeah, it's not something you'd put beyond Mossad, is it? That they got wind that this is the CIA's guy and we don't want this to happen. It's just, let's just blow up his fucking plane. I mean, that's the simplest answer. So, I wouldn't put it past them at all. But, yeah, that is what the preview seemed to be suggesting, is that that's who they're looking at, and that Allison is being given the job of, you've got to look into the Israelis and see if they were behind.
And in that preview, and obviously we'll have to, because in the previews they only show you these scenes from like the very beginning of the episode, which is good because it doesn't ruin anything. But she even says to Dar Adal, just to be clear, you want me to spy on this Israeli ambassador? Sort of like, can we do that? Is that allowed? So kind of interesting. Perhaps there's more to that relationship. And two things quickly right there. One, I didn't get how that would benefit Israel. They seem to want a stable Syria. They want Assad in place. So I don't know how blowing up this general who, did he pose much of a threat? I don't know. I'm not sure how that really stabilizes Syria. This general who's flying into Switzerland, against all sorts of international protocols. Then his plane is blown up with his, daughter, wife, and, close, security guys of Assad. I'm not sure how that really benefits Israel. I feel like that just sort of makes Assad look weak, but whatever. I don't know if the show, the producers really want you to dig too deep into that. But
I guess we'll find out in future episodes. But here's a question for you along those lines. Then, are they going to initially look into the possibility that the Israelis were behind it, find out that that's wrong, and somehow, even though this would be even more ridiculous, they're going to end up blaming it on ISIS?
Maybe I hadn't even thought about that.
Because we've been talking about how for the first 2-3 episodes, they kept implying there's going to be a big ISIS attack in Western Europe. Well, this is the big terror attack in Western Europe of this series so far. Yeah. And I just wonder, even though it would be bloody ridiculous to suggest that ISIS had infiltrated a CIA operation and been able to blow up this plane, I mean, it's entirely plausible that Mossad could have done that, or another intelligence agency for that matter, but the notion that ISIS would do it in Geneva would be ridiculous. But at the same time, I wouldn't put it past Homeland to incorporate that. So.
No, I hadn't even thought about that. You see, in my mind, I was sort of thinking that, okay, so they've taken this step of basically just, all right, we're done with the Syria storyline. That's obviously not happening this season.
Not, no.
And I sort of thought, okay, so now is this going to be more about the sort of struggles within, the struggles that happen between rival, agencies. And we sort of saw that in the last season with the sort of CIA-ISI rivalry going on. But are we going to now see, is the storyline now going to be, can the CIA trust Mossad? Can Mossad trust the CIA? There's going to be something going on there. And then at the same point, obviously now, the Russian, the FSB, has these documents. So there's obviously going to be a much more overt confrontation between the Russians and the Americans. And a listener of mine, we were tweeting the other day, and he was sort of saying that he thought that this was going to be kind of about the sort of end of traditional, the old school operations that the CIA is into, which is sort of what Saul was trying to do there with this, regime change, and we'll get our guy in, and we'll back.
Yeah, it's right out of the 50s playbook. Yeah,
right, exactly, and that perhaps this season is about sort of destroying those ideas and instituting a new, playbook, perhaps. So I don't know, but it definitely seems like it's going to. I mean, it definitely seems like Russia is going to be a major focal point.
Oh, certainly. But just sticking with the Syria thing, I know there was a couple of things you wanted to highlight. Just one line that jumped out at me was where Saul is, he's talking to what's his name, General Youssef?
Yes.
The originally named General Youssef.
Yeah, right.
who I also thought was a pretty weak actor.
Mm-hmm.
I know he's only a one-episode character, so obviously they just got a guy who looks the part, but I really thought they could have got someone better than him.
Mm-hmm.
But he's talking to him, and he said, and he's going on about how IS are planning a big offensive against the regime. It's always the regime, isn't it?
Right.
The government. And he said ISIS control half of all Syrian territory.
Mm.
And I thought, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
That's just complete fantasy land, particularly right now, since they're getting their asses handed to them by the Russian Air Force. But, and since I brought that up, not to in any way celebrate that. A lot of people have become very kind of gung-ho about Russia bombing the shit out of ISIS, and I don't think that's a particularly good, outcome in this whole situation. It's kind of amusing in some ways, because it's like, well, he did go and join the Islamic State.
Mm-hmm.
What did you expect was going to happen? But yeah, just to say that, Saul putting again, they put those words in Saul's mouth, because he seems like the voice of reason. He seems like an intelligent guy who wouldn't just talk complete nonsense. But in this case, he is. IS, Daesh, whatever we're supposed to be calling this gang, they basically control one medium-sized town and a few other little bits and pieces, and that's it.
And then they get bombed, and then they fade away into the background, and then they go to another town where they can come in and they can raise the black flag and throw gay men off of buildings, and then they get bombed, and then they leave that village. I mean, that's how all amorphous terror groups operate. You're not gonna.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I mean that's and Daesh, ISIL, ISIS is very amorphous. If they even really exist. I mean, and I was just reading an article today. With the Russian bombing campaigns, you're getting more and more quote moderate groups going to join them. So it's like, what even is ISIS anymore?
Well, and was there ever really a distinction between ISIS and the so-called moderate rebels?
Right.
I mean, if the moderate rebels are still beheading people and eating people's hearts on camera, then they're not really very moderate, are they? And maybe they're not calling themselves ISIS, but to my mind, that doesn't make a huge amount of difference. They're still pretty horrible, violent, nasty people. Again, not to celebrate people bombing them, but just kind of, if that's the world you join, then sooner or later that's probably what's going to happen. But I know there was a few things you wanted to pick out, particularly from this Syria storyline. So let's just focus on that.
Sure. I mean, I guess first off, we're sort of talking about Saul's conversation, and I just found that whole scene interesting. If you think that this is the idea or the sort of scenario that the CIA wants to put out into the mainstream. So it's like this is the CIA's plan. It's to sort of blackmail this general who they've had no previous contact with before. They don't really know that much about him. I mean, they even sort of, he says, you don't know anything about me. And Saul's like, well, I know that you're, a patriot. And it's like, you don't have any other intel? You don't have something else that you can use? And that just seemed so ridiculous. Why would the CIA ever trust someone or rely on them? The CIA, they pay people like Mobutu or Noriega or the Shah. These are people that have their entire career is based on the fact that they've been CIA from the beginning. You don't just pick, hey, yeah, General Youssef, you seem kind of like a nice guy.
You've got the loyalty of your troops. Let's stick you in as head of government. Why not? What could go wrong? Yeah.
Yeah. Here's $10 million, which is like, that's it. That's really not that much. I mean, seriously, you could, unless it really doesn't take much to bribe someone, but it would be like, if I was a general, I'd be like, oh, I want at least $1 million. You know what I mean? I'm going to go up against Assad and his whole, the entire military and intelligence structure.
Well, so and they've got to have in the back of their mind, if this goes wrong, I'm going to have to get back out of here.
Exactly.
I'm going to have to go and, flee to some Caribbean island or something.
For sure.
I want to have a wad of money sat there waiting in a bank account for me.
Yeah. So that whole thing was just kind of ridiculous. But I think that's part of this sort of, we're not in the, as Saul said, we're not in the business of overthrowing Arab dictators. I think this is their way of being like, okay, Yusuf is kind of a nice guy. He's not really that bad. And, Saul even says, you'll be the democratic reformer. So I think that's just sort of the CIA's way of being like, this is our new way of doing it. It's not with these brutal people like Mobutu that we cultivate over, the course of many, many years. It's these nice democratic reformers who love their daughters who are dying of, liver transplant or something. So that was really interesting. But the main thing with the whole Syria thing, and it comes up multiple times in this episode, is the talk about these chemical weapon attacks. And I found this really fascinating. We have it in the very, very beginning. We have the Israeli ambassador talking about how, isn't Yusuf involved in chemical weapons or something? And then even in that conversation between Saul and Yusuf, Saul, I couldn't really tell because it was so vague, but Saul sort of admits that there's a little bit more to the whole chemical weapons stuff than just, it was Assad. He even says, yeah, I know you weren't responsible, but Assad will still, throw you under the bus. So then it's like, well, then who was responsible, Saul? What was so fascinating is that in this episode, they mentioned Ghouta in that conversation. He says, we saw the bodies at Ghouta. That's all that's all the ICC needs. So, earlier, last week before this episode came out, 2 deputy members of the CHP, which is, the major opposition party in Turkey, held a big press conference. And not big in that there weren't that many people there, but big in terms of what they were saying, that they, had, information based on investigations in the aftermath of the Ghouta attacks that not only was it the rebels that actually launched gassed the suburbs, but that these weapons came directly from Turkey, from a chemical facility in Turkey that has close ties to the government, and that again it was Turkish intelligence, the MIT, that knew at the very least that this was going on. And this actually comes from telephone calls and a bunch of documents from a very large investigation that took place just after the attacks in Turkey. About 13 people were arrested, including a high-ranking sort of Al-Qaeda figure in Turkey. And then, of course, they were all let go and they, disappeared. But I bring this up only because it was like, that was a big story, at least for me. I was, this is big. And again, I would, Turkey, it's just 2 guys saying this. When things like this happen, I generally do believe them. Turkey has had a history of doing this, different political parties. Everyone knows what's going on in Turkey. You know what I mean? Whether you're in Erdogan's government or the CHP, the MHP, the Gulen movement, they all know what's going on. And when they do release these nuggets of information, they're generally true. For instance, the Gulen movement will release all sorts of information about Erdogan, his government smuggling in Uyghur fighters, into Turkey to go fight in Syria. And then Erdogan has to be like, yeah, it's sort of true. He kind of has to walk it back. These sort of things are generally, I wouldn't take them with a grain of salt. I would generally believe them. And this also shows the level to which these political parties are willing to go to defeat Erdogan, because again, you don't want to go too deep into this because you don't know, in Turkey, politics is very murky and you don't know who this is going to affect. But anyway, I found it really interesting that we have this story breaking, and then only a few days later on Sunday, we have Homeland and featured throughout the episode are all of these mentions about how it was Assad who did this. It's all Assad. The chemical weapons are him. The ICC. These are war crimes. All this sort of stuff. When you had these deputies say, and they're going to be releasing more information in the coming days, actually documenting this. And again, this would go towards what Seymour Hersh wrote about. That this was, Turkish intelligence. This would go towards what people may be familiar with Matthew Van Dyke, who, of course, was in conversations with Elliot Higgins, the armchair, chemical weapons specialist, was saying that this was probably the rebels that actually had these weapons. And he even then told Steven Sotloff, who, of course, was one of the first journalists to be beheaded by ISIS, to, quote, bring a gas mask when he came to Syria because the rebels had so many chemical weapons. So that was really one of those moments, again, in the show where it's like, how do you predict, it's so relevant, and it's so like, if you saw this article about, oh, wait, so maybe it was Turkey, and then boom, a couple days later, no, don't worry. It was definitely Assad. There's nothing else to it. So, I don't know what that, how that fits into this. And again, it just sort of goes towards this really unsettling level to which Homeland informs the American and now European public to a larger degree on what the sort of official narrative is. And one little final thing on that, and I'll throw it back to you, Tom, is that the opening scene, we have, everyone at the ambassador's house for a Seder. And what's the first thing that, he comes out of his mouth is he's talking about how Hitler and how, we're in, we were once, oppressed here, and that we have to, Islamic terrorism is just like Hitler. And again, Netanyahu, the same week of this chemical weapon attack, basically said that Hitler wasn't really that bad, that, he just wanted to expel the Jews, and that it was really the Mufti in Palestine that convinced him to kill all the Jews. And then Hitler said, oh, okay, sure, I guess, I'll go with that. So just again, like, they, in the opening episode of this, they're linking Islamic terrorism and Hitler, and Netanyahu was just linking, Hitler and the Palestinians. So very interesting. And one of those, I just couldn't help but not have those things factor in when I was watching.
No, that line about, at the start of the episode where the Israeli ambassador is sort of talking about, whatever, you're right, he's just drawing the parallel. He's essentially saying, oh, at one point here in Berlin, us Jews were being, wiped out by the Nazis, and now we're facing a very similar threat, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't he even mention something about rockets being fired at them?
Yeah.
As though that's the equivalent of being rounded up and put into extermination and forced labor camps.
Yeah.
Get real. Not that not that I'm particularly defending people firing rockets at civilians, obviously, but you know what I'm saying here. It's like
they're different degrees.
Yeah, one was an extremely hostile, extremely efficient industrial state. The other was a group of a pretty small number of rebels who are now just sort of randomly trying to resist being wiped out. The two scenarios are not the same thing at all. So no, of course, it's an absurd concept. And I had a twinge about that. Oh, right, this is... or at least it reminded me of that.
Yeah,
Netanyahu going full retard mode.
Yes.
Of all the stupid stuff that Netanyahu has said, and let's face it, he is a man who has made a career out of saying stupid, horrible things. This is right up there. This really is trying to essentially absolve Hitler for the Holocaust. And blame it all on Palestinians? Really?
Oh yeah, not to get too off topic, but even right wingers in Israel are like, oof, that's a bridge a little bit too far for even us. That's if he was any other person, he would be a Holocaust denier.
Yeah.
That's not. It's pretty. That's the level, and I guess this definitely has to do with the West making nice with Iran, and suddenly, Netanyahu doesn't have his big enemy, so he's got to go back to the Palestinians.
Yeah, I guess that's part of this. I think it's also just that Netanyahu is, as he gets older and older, he has got just sort of more prone to saying the most outrageous things. I mean, you think Donald Trump is bad, but...
Right. Yeah.
You know, he's like Donald Trump, but a bit more old and senile and a lot more psychotic. So, yeah. But let's not get... Go on, actually.
No, just before I forget, there's still on serious stuff. I don't know if this popped into your mind, but they're, they make this whole thing about, and the general smokes, so we can get him alone. And that reminded me of in the Lone Gladio, Greg, the sort of rogue, Gladio agent. He doesn't like smoking because it's a sign of weakness, and he waits for one of the when he's on his sort of rampage against Gladio, he waits for that one guy, his ex-partner or whatever, to go outside to smoke a cigarette so he can shoot him. And that just sort of popped into my head, and I was like, don't, if you get involved in intelligence, don't start smoking, because that's when they'll get you.
Sound advice, Pearse. Sound advice. Yeah. But the other thing that we really wanted to pick up on, and perhaps this episode isn't the most appropriate. Well, actually, before we get on to that, there was something in the whole hacker storyline. I'm not particularly interested in talking about the Carrie storyline, if that's all right with you, because
I don't think there's really that much to get into with that.
And it went on for too long anyway. But the hacker storyline, I did find it amusing that when Laura Poitras goes around to try and find this hacker who's going to then find Newman on the internet, but when she goes in and she doesn't know who's who, there's the girl that she is actually looking for who's answered the door, but she doesn't realise that's the girl she's looking for. And there's the other friend, and the other friend looks not exactly, but pretty similar to Runa Sandvik. Certainly there's a resemblance there, and I'm pretty sure, given that that's a minor character, again, they've picked someone who looks like that. Because all she had to do was sit in a chair and say a couple of things. They could have got any actress in the world. And I think they have deliberately chosen one who looks like Runa Sandvik.
And they had the prism, no prism thing, the poster in the back.
Yeah, all of that. So that was just a little thing that I noticed and thought, that's probably deliberate, but I guess we don't know. But yeah, the thing we really wanted to get into is this concept of hyperreality, which seems to be so central to everything that's going on in Homeland. And just to, I guess, define this concept for people, it is something we've talked about lots of times before, but this is a term that we've only really started using recently for it. It's the inability to distinguish the real from simulations, the real from the fake, the real from the fiction. And this is a very important concept in Robbie Graham's work, and obviously we're going to be talking to him in the CIA in Hollywood Season 2. And I would recommend Robbie Graham's book that's just come out, Silver Screen Sources, which I've been reading recently. It is absolutely brilliant. But he talks about this idea quite a lot, and this is one of the reasons why we're now picking up on this term. But it's the same concept we've been talking about for a while, that when you mix up real life events and real people and real news, stories, and all of this, and you mix that all up with fictional entertainment, but fictional entertainment that's set in the real world, it does contribute to this. It does contribute to people's inability or decreasing ability to make these fundamental distinctions and to remember, oh no, that's something that really happened and that's something that I saw on TV. Because most of what you find out about what's really happening in the rest of the world, you're finding out through TV anyway, through a mediated reality, through a simulation. It's a digital image that you're actually watching. You're not watching it like you would be watching an event for real with your own eyes. So people are always, when they're consuming media, when they're experiencing stuff through media, they're always going to feel this to some extent, and they're always going to be affected by that to some extent. But with the internet, with streaming 24-hour news, with a million TV channels to choose from, with all of these things, it's just become that much worse and that much more accentuated. And throughout this whole review series, we've been breaking down how it is that Homeland does this and how it contributes to this. And I think we've done that again in this episode.
Yeah.
But I guess the question is, why? Why would the CIA be so interested in productions that contribute to people's sense of hyperreality, that contribute to people's inability to distinguish the real from the myth, the fact from the fantasy, whatever. Do you have... I mean, there's a lot of different ways we could go with that question, I know.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm just asking, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's clear that they're definitely actively doing this. And just to plug Robbie Graham again, there's a great talk that he gave, I believe it was a year ago, just as his book was coming out. And if you just type in like Robbie Graham hyperreality, I think it's 2014, you'll find it. And he really does break it down and definitely shows how, in terms of, UFO cinema, that this is, I mean, on a scale that's unprecedented. Maybe perhaps even more than, what we talk about, but sort of more or less the same. I think that I think there's a lot of reasons why the CIA would be interested in doing this. I think that part of it is to kind of lull people into this uneasy sense where they sort of know what's going on, and that they're informed, at least to the degree to which they want us to be informed about certain topics, while at the same time we don't care. And there's this sort of flippant nature to hyperreality. And again, what Robbie talks about is this sort of, that an event will be both simultaneously real and fake. And that's a really powerful tool, because you can have, taking, say, Homeland, you can inform the public on an event so that when the event happens, they'll both believe it and not believe it. And I think that sort of puts it into the context when we're talking about, say, terrorism, that, oh, God, this is so horrible. But whatever, it doesn't really matter because it's not really real. There's that sort of lingering thing in the back of your head where you're like, well, yeah, it's real, but I also saw it on that TV show. And how did the TV show know that, that was going to happen? And it sort of puts you into that position where you're like, well, whatever. I don't really want to know. I don't really care anymore. I'll just start watching more TV, So I think it is a powerful tool in that sense where you can, again, you will have people believing what they are seeing, but at the same time, there's a part of them that doesn't quite believe in it. And that's sort of the best place to have people, because then you can kind of just mold them and push them. And ultimately, they don't really give a shit what they're seeing because they don't really care, because they sort of know that it's sort of real, but sort of not. So that's one interpretation of, I think, why they love it.
Well, if we take that and apply that to, say, the Bin Laden raid, just because that's quite a useful example, because that's something where we've had several different stories about it, right? We initially got all that crap about, we used his wife as a human shield, and then we've had 6 different stories of exactly how that thing went down. And to a certain extent, it doesn't matter. There's the side of propaganda where it's let's put out several different versions, because as long as they believe that Bin Laden was killed, it doesn't really matter which version of that they believe.
Right.
So, okay, you've got that. But we're talking about something else. We're talking about what are they doing for the people who won't believe that? What are they doing to the people who, when they first read that story, they went, come off it.
Right.
They didn't get Bin Laden in Pakistan in some house. That's just, that didn't happen. People like us, when we first, I'm sure when you first saw that storyline or someone told you that this is supposedly happened, you were like, come off it, hang on, I'm not believing this, I'm not just buying
Really?
it.
Yeah.
So what are they doing for people like that? Well, if they, like you say, if they can get them into a position where they believe that something happened in Abbottabad, and maybe aren't 100% sure that it wasn't Bin Laden, because I'm not 100% sure, because I don't actually know. I don't think it was. I don't believe that it was. I don't buy the story that it was. But that doesn't necessarily mean I've got any evidence or a strong argument that it definitively wasn't Bin Laden. But in any case, if the propagandists can get you into a position where you're not quite sure what you believe. Do you believe that there was a raid and that it was bin Laden? Do you believe that it was a raid and there wasn't bin Laden? Do you believe there wasn't a raid at all? Were these guys even there? And I actually brought this up in my review of the book by the Navy SEAL, which is full of weird little indications that, hang on, did this actually happen?
Right.
And you have to wonder again with that book, just as with Homeland, is this actually the reaction they want us to have? Where we're just left in this position where we can't be certain of anything. We sort of believe some things, but at the same time feel duty-bound almost to question them. So where does that leave us? Are we not just left in a position of almost paralysis over all of these issues, over chemical weapons in Syria, bin Laden, whatever it is? Are we not left in a position where, because we can't make a decision on what we even believe is reality, then there is no political consequence for us. There is no, therefore we should do this. Because you know what I mean? If you're, even in the most basic sense of these are crimes, right? Someone killed those people in Gouda with those chemical weapons.
Yes.
I think we're both pretty much sure of that. Although, of course, there are plenty of people out there who don't even believe that those people were killed. So, there again. But even in the most basic sense, you have to believe that was a crime, those people were killed, someone out there did that, so that there is the political consequence of, let's investigate the crime and try and bring the perpetrators to justice. But if you can't even decide that happened, did it happen? Didn't it happen? Were those people killed? Was that all that footage faked? Then the whole notion of, let's investigate a crime and try and bring people to justice
disappears.
It's irrelevant, yeah. So is that where they're going with this, I wonder?
Oh, it seems quite, especially, I mean, in the alt media, the research community, that seems to be, of course, that's like all the rage, and we've spoken about this at, time and time again.
It's
crisis
all fake,
after, yeah, everything is fake, but yeah, I mean, I think that what you were just sort of saying there about how then there are no consequences to anything. It doesn't really matter. That's powerful, and this whole, we spoke about in the first season of the CIA in Hollywood, the sort of like black magic ritual type stuff going on in a lot of these movies, and this is like certainly harkens to that. I mean, they are using magic, in that they are altering our perception of reality, and that's essentially what you're doing in a magic ritual. And they're doing that more and more. I mean, I really see it with this season in particular, where it's like, you get these guys saying the Gouda attack was Turkey, and then you get an episode a few days later, no, it was Assad. And then it's sort of, you're left in that sort of middle of the road where you're like, what you were saying, where you're not really sure, and you're almost like, I think it's a way to get people to not care, and then it's like, okay, if the U.S. starts bombing Syria, it's sort of like, well, whatever, who knows? Somebody did something. It must be okay. That's again, to sort of just reiterate that's a very powerful tool, especially when you start thinking about, in terms of this isn't just like propaganda on the internet, say, and I think we've both experienced a lot of that, where you're if you're watching a YouTube video or something, and and then you sort of wonder, well, who is this guy who made this YouTube video? Or you start, you'll say you post something, and then you get all these bizarre comments from these people that they just created a YouTube account like a day ago, yet it's filled with all sorts of comments talking about how crazy you are or whatever. But with Homeland, we're talking about this is a massive show that's now being also focused on Europe as well. So this is altering our like pop culture. This is altering our arts. This is on a much larger level and scale. And again, me, you, and Matt Alfred talked about this. It's like, if you're okay with the CIA or the DOD, manipulating your cinema, I mean, that's a scary level, because then it's sort of like, at what point does that end? At what point are you going to allow this to continue until, suddenly you can't make a movie without the CIA or the DoD being involved in it. So yeah, these are really powerful statements. I didn't think this episode would be so heavy, but
well, I mean, this is a subject, obviously, and a concept that we'll return to as this season progresses, because we will want to kind of break this down further for people and try and explain, how is it working with this particular idea and what have you. But before we wrap up here, there was a couple of articles that, sadly, we don't seem to have had any from listeners in the last couple of weeks, but a couple of articles that have come up, news stories, what have you, in the recent days, aside from those that you've already mentioned, that we did want to touch on. And one of these is a series of reviews that's being done on a blog for the Wall Street Journal, where it's basically an intelligence expert weighs in on Homeland. And after every episode, he basically does a review of that episode and complains about some stuff. And I've been reading these every week just out of interest, and it was only really this week's that I thought was kind of worthy of mentioning and worthy of people going to read for themselves. Just because the whole thing was so absurd, but it plays into this conversation that we're just having. That the guy sat there going, "Oh, I don't believe that would happen. That's so Hollywood." And I'm thinking, this is a TV show, my friend. Of course it's a bit Hollywood. It's supposed to be entertainment. This isn't supposed to be a fly-on-the-wall fucking documentary about CIA operations. Get real. But I suppose I've just said it, get real. But this is the thing. The guy can't distinguish between this is supposed to be a realistic portrayal of a CIA operation and this is supposed to be an entertaining portrayal of a CIA operation. And those two things aren't the same.
Yeah.
Homeland is still a piece of entertainment. There's a lot more going on in it, of course, but it is ultimately a piece of entertainment. It's not supposed to be 100% accurate. So him sitting there and bitching about, I can't remember, there's all sorts of things in there where you just...
the CIA would never,
they would never go after a child.
Daughter. Oh, yeah, right. And it's like, this is the same agency that, vaporizes people at weddings and funerals in Pakistan. So going after one little girl, please.
Well, and as if they've never kidnapped a child or threatened to kidnap a child in order to try and get someone to do something.
And again, I mean, in the last episode, what did Quinn do? He kidnapped a little kid.
He does, yes. But yeah, I kind of guessed. I wondered what your take on this article was, because I did find it very funny that he kept complaining about how unrealistic it is when realism isn't the primary concern of this show. It is to some extent, concern of it, but it isn't. Certainly isn't the primary concern, is it?
Well, I found what I found really interesting was his. He found it very objectionable, and so did I. That the Russian intelligence FSB would get this guy in, this German hacker, and again. They're not in like, it's like the CIA in this show, they have these safe houses, they have these offices, they have these cool locations. Whereas the FSB, it's like the back room of a scary looking Russian restaurant where they torture somebody. And there's like people in the front eating, and they're in the back beating the living daylights out of this German hacker. And this guy was right in the Wall Street Journal article that, why would they kill him? Why would they even care if he had 2 copies? What's it to them? And again, you don't just murder a source that's giving you, these primo CIA documents, because wouldn't you want to get more? I mean, I'm sure they could have set this guy up at the Russian embassy or something, and they could have had him hacking all sorts of, CIA stuff if it apparently was this freaking easy. But instead they decide to, brutally torture him, beat up his girlfriend, shoot her in the head after getting, the second USB drive. And he was saying, this is so crazy and blah, blah, blah. The Russians are really good at this. This is not something they would do. It would only... they would draw attention. They could get expelled from the country or worse, because they're now, openly committing espionage. And he goes into a whole thing about how that really works with spying agencies and whatnot. But at the same time, right, he misses the whole point that this isn't about the realism of the FSB. This is about a show that is a pro-CIA show showing how the Russians are even worse, and that they're really just, common thugs that, they don't even really seem to care. It's like, why do they care about this guy? And just to add sort of hyper-reality to this, I was just before we were recording, I was listening to RFERL does a podcast with this Brian Whitmore, who works for them, called The Power Vertical, and this is all about Russia and Russian politics and whatnot. And Brian Whitmore is just, as big a Russiaphobe as you can get. He just, Russia is the only corrupt government on the planet. The West is an angel in his eyes. And on his most recent episode, he was pushing this even harder than he has, previously. As long as I've been listening to him, and one of his co-hosts, Mark Galeotti, this was the most I ever saw the two of them sort of fighting, where Mark Galeotti, who again is not, he's not Mr. I Love Russia, but he was even like, Russia's not the only corrupt one out there. There are other, even the West acts like a thug. And Brian Whitmore just wouldn't take it, and he had to prove that, that Putin and his regime and all this sort of stuff. So again, I don't think the people watching Homeland listen necessarily to Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, but I just found it interesting again that that he was pushing this harder than ever. And this podcast again, generally comes out on Fridays, 2 days before Homeland, where we get this. But yeah, that was what was so funny. This guy is sort of, the Russians don't do that, and it's like, that's not the point of this. The point is, like, all of these shows dealing with espionage and stuff that are out right now. It's about how evil the Russians are, and clearly now the FSB is going to be a major player in this season. So yeah, again, this intelligence expert can't seem to differentiate between propaganda and secrets and lies. That's what espionage is. He can't seem to differentiate that and this show. And then again, yeah, he goes into there's other little things where it's what was the? Oh yeah, he was talking about how the CIA is really they're good. They would never hurt a child or whatever. And then he goes into graphic detail about how, well, if he really killed Carrie, he would have to chop off her fingers or scoop out her eyeball so that they could check the retinas to make sure that it's a real person. So it's like sort of one of those like, oof, that's okay, like that's acceptable, but this other thing isn't. So yeah, just another, and it seemed very much like a lot of the kind of stuff that we've talked about before. Whenever it's like a CIA person writing about one of these shows, they sort of say, "Oh, it's so crazy and outlandish," but then they throw in these little weird nuggets where, like, really, he would have to, mutilate a body to, put it in the
to
Dropbox.
Satisfy them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, I think you're right. I think this guy is suffering from a bit of hyperreality himself, or possibly he's just another one of these intelligence experts who isn't very intelligent, because most of them do come across as, quite frankly, a little bit dim. They say really basic things. Maybe that's just part of the nature of what they're doing, but yeah, in any case, I thought that whole thing about Russia, that's absolutely the point. That because this guy is so fixated on how realistic is this, would they actually do this, or would they do that, or would they do the other, or would it happen like this, or would it look like that? He's missing the fucking point. The point is, as you say, this is a pro-CIA show, and they want to make the FSB look crude and thuggish and medieval, basically, is their point. And they succeeded in doing that entirely. So whether or not the storyline is realistic is beside the point. But to him, that's the whole point.
Yeah. And even more so, who does he kill? The German. That struck me straight up as this is targeted at the German public who they're trying to market this show to a degree. That, yeah, if you want to work with Putin and Russia, you don't like sanctions and whatnot, then look what's going to happen to you. This is the naive sort of, because that's what they push that narrative over and over. The Germans, their economy is so based on this and on Russia, and the close ties, and that they sort of have this sort of neutral stance when it comes to Russia. Of course, they're part of NATO and all they're not neutral at all, but.
No.
And this is what is this whole thing is a financial transaction. And again, it's like, what did he give him? a couple $100,000. That's it for CIA. I mean, I was like,
for over 1,000 CIA documents on a secret
so
surveillance
ridiculous.
program.
Yeah. But, I guess even so, it's like, that's to the sort of German, public that, oh, you want to do business? Well, look, this is what happens,
No, sure. The character is a metaphor for that kind of Germany, for that aspect of Germany, absolutely. But the other story we, I guess, have to touch on before we round off here is this absurd one about the hacking of John Brennan's email account. John Brennan,
oh, yes.
The CIA director, John Brennan. And this has been, it is like, as soon as I saw that, I thought, is this just some promotion for Homeland? Because it just made me think of The Interview and the whole Sony hack and the way that ultimately, if anything, worked in Sony's favor. And that was, blamed on outside forces, but ultimately seems to have been some kind of PR operation cooked up, we assume, between the CIA and Sony Pictures. And the whole thing just reminded me of that, because it was, when you look at what's come out from this, WikiLeaks they were spunking themselves on the first couple of days, saying, "Oh, we've got inside the CIA director's email account. We've got it all. We're going to publish it soon." And they've so far published about a dozen email attachments. They've published nothing for several days now on it, so it doesn't look like they've got a huge amount of stuff. If this is what they've actually put out there, it's kind of a non-story, really, because this isn't, to be clear, this isn't his government email account. This isn't his CIA.gov email account. All of this stuff is from several years ago, 2008, 2009, so quite a while before he even became CIA director. And, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but all of this stuff is dead boring. I had a look at these email attachments, and I thought, well, I could have figured out all of this by myself just by reading a newspaper, frankly. Yeah. There's nothing... where's the beef? As per usual.
Oh, yeah. I know they make a big deal that he suffered from depression or something.
He had consulted with some kind of psychiatric professional.
Right, there could have been anything.
Point.
Yeah. There could have been anything. You know what I mean?
A therapist helping him to give up smoking. I mean,
right? Exactly. Yeah. And then they make this. They harp on about this that the CIA didn't want to hire his company, his as a contractor, and then oddly enough. There are all these these emails where he's talking about how he's not really in favor of what's going on in Afghanistan, and he doesn't like drones and stuff. And it's like, so what, is WikiLeaks making John Brennan look okay? In comparison,
making the CIA director look like a pacifist. Yeah,
exactly. So I mean, the whole thing. It did. I had a listener of mine, tweeting out to me just like, is Saul's or Carrie's emails going to get hacked this season?
I do hope so.
Yeah, I mean, and again, that's like this sort of like hyper reality hitting you in the face, where it's like, these events are either happening after an episode of Homeland or before an episode of Homeland. And I sort of, we've talked about before this sort of the chicken or the egg. I mean, what event is it, are the events informing the show, or is the show informing the events?
Well, this is something I raised in my email, wasn't it? Were the guys, because apparently, I mean, the first episode of Homeland for this season broadcast start of October, first weekend of October, unless I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it must be, because we're now at the end of October, and we're on the 4th episode. So, yeah, it must have been. And this hack supposedly took place around the 12th or 13th, so maybe after the second episode had broadcast, which means there's a possibility here that if this was a real hack, that those hackers were copycats. They were in some way inspired by the show and this story of, 2 bedroom or backroom hackers getting into the CIA's servers. And they haven't done that. They got into some old email account that John Brennan doesn't even use anymore, but from the looks of things, at least anyway. So we do have to wonder, like you say, to what extent are these informing each other? And given the timeline that we have to wonder if this was some punk kids who got into some AOL account. Was it because they watched Homeland? And why has no one asked them? This hasn't turned up in any of... I mean, they're getting interviewed by Wired and The Guardian.
Right.
And they're turning up all over the place in terms of interviews. I don't know how people are getting in touch with them, but...
Yeah, however it is that this happens.
But no one seems to have asked them, hang on, this is just like that central storyline in this season of Homeland that's going on right now. Is there any relation there? No one seems
Did you watch the show?
Yeah, just do you watch the show and what do you think of it? Doesn't seem to come up. So,
well, I mean, what we spoke last episode, I made a big deal about how ISIS never talks about Israel, and lo and behold, the first ISIS Hebrew video comes out, and I believe actually it was on the 10th of October that ISIS first called on the Palestinians to rise up against Israel, and to commit attacks and stuff. And that's only, again, a few days before another episode of Homeland. And again, this is obviously becoming somewhat integral to this season. This sort of that Israel is threatened by ISIS.
Well, certainly Israel is a lot more important to this season than ever before. And that does seem to be the narrative, that they're concerned with primarily, not with Assad or anything like that, but they're primarily concerned with this evil Islamic State that doesn't really exist, that might rise up and, conquer Israel? Really?
Yeah, again, that could ever happen. But
as if. But once again, it's the hyperreality. It doesn't matter that it's completely implausible and it could never happen. It's the fear of it happening. It's what if you can make someone believe it enough that they have the right sort of reaction to it, then maybe it doesn't matter if the other half of their brain is screaming at them, this is bullshit, don't believe it. And if you can engineer people and guide them into that crazy middle ground where they really don't know what's what, then manipulation perhaps just becomes that much easier. But, before we round off here, is there anything else you wanted to say? We haven't talked that much about the episode itself. We've got distracted on a number of tangents.
But I think that's okay. I mean, there wasn't, this episode wasn't necessarily jam-packed. I mean, I think we did this when we were just sort of watching it and we were doing one episode on the whole season. But, every episode we would have these big, long email chains where we were like, oh my, it's the next episode that's really going to blow us away. And then they do, but the show is very good about little, incrementally sort of giving you little bits and pieces. Yeah, because again, I really haven't the foggiest idea where any of this is going. I mean, obviously at some point there's going to be, Newman is now, fucked. And interesting, just quickly, it's the FSB. It's not the CIA still really has no fucking clue who this guy is. They never mention him. They're never, actively investigating him. They still think that Laura Sutton is getting information from Carrie. So now it's the Russians that are going after him. So that's an interesting switch, that it's the evil FSB. So I have no idea what is going on there. But yeah, I guess just quickly, I'll just say that they're really, really making me despise the Laura Sutton character. And I just find that interesting. And it's just, there's no humor to her at all. She's just so unpleasant. And
she's really smug.
Yeah, she's really, really smug. Exactly. And again, it's in that scene where she's with the female hacker, and she's like, well, I'm taking a big risk. She's like, I'm a person of interest. And it's like, right. And this girl has got an ankle bracelet on her. She can't leave her house. And if she does, they could send her away to prison for the rest of her life. You work for a billionaire industrialist with lawyers coming out of the wazoo, and way more, publicity than this German hacker. And it's just sort of again, nothing happened to Laura Poitras. She travels around the world. She's totally safe and fine. And she makes a ton of money from Pierre Omidyar. So yeah, they're really making me dislike her. And, which is, it's fascinating that they're doing that. And with the Newman character, I think we're supposed to kind of maybe sympathize a little bit with him. So I don't know. I guess we'll have to see where that's going. But other than that, I think we covered pretty much everything.
Well, let me just throw out there a complete guess that I have obviously all my guesses about this show. You have to take them with a massive pinch of salt. My guess is Newman's going to be recruited by the FSB, but it's going to turn out that the whole thing was orchestrated by the CIA.
Ooh.
That Newman was actually working for the CIA all along, whether he knew it or not.
Well, and that we never mentioned it, but again, in that first episode, when I first watched it, it's they're hacking the ISIS website, right? And then it's like, boom, cuts to the CIA monitoring it, and it's like, did the CIA create that website to, attract people in there? It was just one of those weird, like, I wouldn't put it past them sort of a thing. So yeah, I like that prediction. I hope that comes true.
Well, I don't think it will, but if I was writing this season, that's what would happen. But anyway, P.S., on that note, I think we should round off this one and pick this up again next week. But this has been a pleasure, as always, and I'm looking forward to how the Homeland season progresses and how our review season continues.
Yeah, absolutely. I've enjoyed doing every episode, and I like where we're going. And I like that we don't really know. Each episode is very new for me and Tom, and I think we never know what we're going to talk about. So it's really fun to do episodes like that.
So that was my conversation with Pearse, and you can join us again next week for our review of the next episode of Homeland over on Pearse's site, PawkinsPolicyReview.com. As always, I am Tom Secker of SpyCulture.com, and you've been listening to Clandestime. And you can subscribe to this show via RSS, email, iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher. All the links and sign-ups are at SpyCulture.com. I will, of course, be back in 2 weeks with our review of the 6th episode of Homeland, so stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, thanks for listening, and of course, take care.